Imagine that you are missing. Not just lost, but gone. And then, 8 years later, you are found. Not in the forest, not at the bottom of a lake, but in an abandoned mine, welded shut from the inside. You are sitting, leaning against the wall, next to your loved one. It looks as if you have simply fallen asleep, but you are dead, and the bones in your legs are broken. This is not a story about monsters from the movies. This is the real story of Sara and Andrew. It is a story about how a 3-day trip to the desert turned into an 8-year mystery, the answer to which turned out to be more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. This story began in 2011. Sara and Andrew were an ordinary couple from Colorado. She was 26. He was 28. They weren't extreme sports enthusiasts or experienced survivalists. They were just two people who loved each other and wanted to spend a weekend away from the city. Their plan was as simple as could be. Take their old but reliable car, drive to the desert lands of Utah, pitch a tent there for 3 days and 2 nights, take pictures of the scenery, and just be together. They chose a specific location not far from an area where uranium was actively mined in the mid-9th century. Now all that remains there are abandoned mines, rusting equipment, and roads that have long since disappeared from official maps. For them, it was just exotic, an opportunity to see something unusual and take unique photos. They weren't looking for adventure, let alone trouble. Before leaving on Friday morning, Sara wrote a message to her sister. "We're leaving. We'll be back on Sunday evening. Love you." That was the last message any of their loved ones received. They packed water, food, a tent, sleeping bags, the standard tourist kit. They didn't take any special equipment for exploring mines or anything like that, because they had no intention of doing so. They were only interested in the surface, only in the views of the desert at sunset. The weekend passed. Sunday evening came. Sara and Andrew did not return. At first, no one panicked. Well, maybe they were delayed. Maybe there was bad reception somewhere. These things happen. But when they both failed to show up for work on Monday, their relatives sounded the alarm. Calls to their phones were immediately diverted to voicemail. Friends they had been in contact with confirmed that they had gone to Utah, to the area of the old mines. The family immediately contacted the police, and a search operation was organized that same day. At first, everyone was hopeful. Police, volunteers, dozens of people combed the area. The desert in Utah is a huge, almost endless space. Canyons, rocks, dry riverbeds. Finding 2 people here is like looking for a needle in a haystack. Searchers in cars and ATVs checked all known and abandoned roads. A helicopter was sent up, circling the area for hours trying to spot any sign. A car, a tent, a campfire. But the days passed, and there were no clues. None at all. No one had seen their car. No one had encountered a couple like them. It was as if they had vanished into thin air as soon as they left their city. Hope began to fade with each passing day. The desert weather does not forgive mistakes. During the day, the heat was unbearable, and at night it was cold. If they ran out of water or simply got lost, their chances of survival were dwindling by the hour. The police began to consider other possibilities. Maybe they never made it to Utah. Maybe they decided to run away and start a new life. But this theory was quickly dismissed. Their bank accounts were untouched. Their credit cards had not been used. They had left their pets at home and asked a neighbor to look after them. People who planned to disappear forever. Don't do that. The criminal theory also seemed unlikely. There were almost no people in the area. It was the middle of nowhere. The likelihood of a random attack was extremely low. The search continued for almost a week. Volunteers and family members did not give up. But the police were already preparing to wind down the active phase of the operation. And then on the 7th day, when hope was almost gone, a helicopter pilot noticed a glint in the sun. It was not just a glint. It was flashing lights. Sara and Andrew's car was found. It was parked on one of those abandoned roads that were barely visible on the ground. The road led toward old uranium mines and ended after a few miles. The car was in the middle of the track as if it had just been abandoned. The first thing that caught the eye of the group that arrived at the scene was the hazard lights. The battery was almost dead, and the lights were flickering dimly. It was strange. Hazard lights are turned on when there is a breakdown or stop. That meant that when the car stopped, Sara and Andrew were next to it. The police inspected the car. There were no signs of a break-in, no damage from an accident. The doors were unlocked. Inside, everything looked as if the owners had stepped away for a couple of minutes. There was a map of the area on the passenger seat, next to an empty water bottle. Andrew's phone was found in the glove compartment. Experts later confirmed that there were no missed calls on it, no attempts to call emergency services or anyone close to him. The battery was more than half charged, but the most important find was the navigation system. It was turned on, and the screen showed a route that led further along this deserted road to one of the old mines. This discovery gave hope and raised even more questions. Why didn't they call? Perhaps there was simply no cell phone reception in the area, and they knew it. But then, why was the car abandoned? The police checked the tank. It was completely empty. That explained why they had stopped. They had simply run out of gas. They turned on the hazard lights so they would be visible. That made sense. But where did they go next? And why did the navigator point to a specific mine? Maybe they hoped to find help there or shelter from the sun. The search team, encouraged by the discovery, immediately set off along the route indicated by the navigator. They walked along a barely visible path scorched by the sun. There was not a soul around, only the wind and the echoing silence of the desert. After a couple of miles, they reached their destination. It was the entrance to an old uranium mine, an ordinary, unremarkable descent into the rock, littered with rusty scrap metal and old boards. The entrance was narrow, but it was possible for a person to pass through. The searchers cautiously examined everything around them, but they found nothing. No traces, no belongings, no signs that people had been there recently. The wind and sand over the past few days could have covered any footprints. The rescuers shouted their names several times into the darkness of the mine, but there was only silence in response. Going deeper without special equipment was deadly dangerous. Old mines are labyrinths where a collapse can happen at any moment, or you can be poisoned by accumulated gases. A search of the surrounding area also yielded nothing. They combed every meter within a radius of several miles from the car and the mine entrance. No tents, no sleeping bags, no campfire, nothing at all. It was inexplicable. If they had run out of gas, it would have been logical to set up camp right next to the car and wait for help. Or if they had gone for help, they would have taken at least some things with them, such as water. But all their basic equipment, the tent, sleeping bags, food supplies, had simply disappeared, just like Sara and Andrew themselves. After this discovery, the active search continued for several more days, but to no avail. The police could not send people deep into the unstable mine without direct evidence that the couple was inside. It would have been an unjustified risk. Gradually, the search operation was wound down. Sara and Andrew's case was classified as missing. Their photos were posted on bulletin boards and written about in local newspapers. Their families hired private investigators, but even they couldn't find any new leads. Months passed, then years. The story of Sara and Andrew became one of those dark legends told around the campfire, a mystery covered in desert dust. It seemed that no one would ever know the answer to the question of what had happened to them. The car with an empty tank and the navigator pointing to a dark hole in the rock remained the only silent witnesses to their last journey. And for 8 long years, Complete and utter silence reigned in this case. 8 years have passed. For most people, the story of Sara and Andrew has become just another unsolved mystery, a sad reminder of how dangerous the wilderness can be. The families continued to live with an unhealed wound, without answers, and without even the opportunity to bury their loved ones. The case gathered dust in the archives under the label cold, and so it would have remained had it not been for 2 local residents who in 2019 decided to earn some extra money by collecting scrap metal. These guys were neither detectives nor adventurers. They simply knew that there was a lot of abandoned equipment left in the area of the old uranium mines that could be cut up and sold. On one hot autumn day, they drove their old pickup truck along the same forgotten roads where they had once found the missing couple's car. Their destination was the very mine that Andrew's navigator had pointed to. Not because they knew about this detail, but simply because it was a large site where they hoped to find a lot of metal. When they drove up to the entrance, they saw the same thing the searchers had seen 8 years ago, a hole in the rock littered with debris. But something was wrong. The entrance, which had previously been simply littered with junk, now looked sealed. Someone had dragged a large, rusty sheet of thick metal here and somehow secured it, piling stones and beams on top of it. It was strange. Usually mines are either left open or sealed with concrete and warning signs posted. This looked as if someone had hastily but very securely tried to hide something or prevent someone from getting inside. For metal hunters, this sheet itself was prey. They brought a gas cutter with them. They spent several hours in the heat, cutting a passage in the sheet large enough to crawl through. When they finally finished, the opening emitted a musty, cold, and completely still air. The kind of air that only exists in places that have been sealed for many years. One of the men shone a powerful flashlight inside. At first, the beam revealed only bare stone walls covered with dust and a floor strewn with small stones. The shaft went straight into the rock. He moved the beam further, peering into the darkness, and then the light stopped. At the far end of this small first chamber, about 15 miles from the entrance, were 2 figures. They were just sitting on the floor, leaning their backs against the wall, their heads slightly bowed. They were sitting very close to each other. The man with the flashlight didn't understand what he was seeing at first. Maybe they were mannequins or some kind of trash that looked like people from a distance. He called out to his partner. His partner also looked inside and froze. They both stared silently into the darkness, and then one of them said quietly, "Those are people." There was no panic, just shock. The poses were too calm. There was no blood, no signs of a struggle, just 2 people who seemed to have sat down to rest in the cool air and fallen asleep. But both understood that people don't sleep in a sealed mine. They immediately drove several miles until they got a cell phone signal and called the police. The news of the discovery in the old mine shook the entire state. The police officers who had worked on Sara and Andrew's case 8 years ago immediately understood what place they were talking about. An investigation team and forensic experts were dispatched to the site. It was difficult to work inside. The air was stale, and the place itself was oppressive in its silence. The scene they saw was exactly as the metal hunters had described it. 2 people, a man and a woman, sitting, leaning against the wall. Their clothes, ordinary hiking clothes, were decayed from age, but not torn. There were no personal belongings around them, no backpacks, no water, nothing. Just bare rock and dust. The bodies were heavily mummified due to the dry air in the mine which had preserved them in this position. Sara and Andrew's families were informed of the terrible discovery, and soon DNA analysis confirmed what everyone already knew. It was them. The 8-year search was over. The mystery of their whereabouts had been solved. But from that moment on, a new, even more terrifying mystery began. What had happened to them inside that mine? The investigation began a detailed examination of the scene and the bodies, and immediately a series of oddities emerged that did not fit into any logical explanation. First, there were no injuries on the bodies or clothing that would indicate an attack. No cuts, no bullet wounds, no signs of a struggle. Second, the scene itself. They were sitting calmly. It didn't look like they were panicking, trying to get out, or calling for help. They were just sitting there. But the most important and shocking fact was established by the medical examiner during the autopsy. Both Sara and Andrew had broken bones in their legs, multiple fractures of the shins and feet. These were serious injuries that could not have occurred on their own. Such injuries are sustained when falling from a great height. But how did this fit with the absence of other injuries and their calm posture? And then the investigators noticed the structure of the mine itself. The passage that the metal hunters had opened was horizontal, but above the place where Sara and Andrew were sitting, there was another hole in the ceiling, a vertical shaft leading somewhere upward toward the surface. A new version began to emerge, and it was terrifying. Sara and Andrew did not enter the mine through the side entrance. They fell into it. They fell through the very vertical shaft that was possibly hidden by bushes or boards on the surface. They flew several meters and landed on the stone floor, breaking their legs. They were alive, but immobilized. They couldn't get up, couldn't go anywhere. They were trapped. But this version only explained the injuries. It did not explain the main thing. Who sealed the side exit and why? Investigators carefully examined the very sheet of metal that sealed the entrance. The examination showed that it was welded to the rock using a professional welding machine. Moreover, the welding method indicated that it had been done from the inside. But no equipment was found inside the mine. No welding machine, no generator, not even a simple hammer. Nothing. It was impossible. Someone entered the mine, welded the only exit from the inside, and then simply vanished without leaving any tools behind. The lack of signs of a struggle now seemed even more sinister. If they had been attacked, they would have fought back. But if they had fallen and broken their legs, they were completely helpless. Anyone who found them in that condition could have done anything to them, and someone did. Someone found them wounded and helpless, and instead of helping them, that someone decided to bury them alive. He or they dragged a metal sheet to the side exit, welded it shut, condemning Sara and Andrew to a slow death in complete darkness from hunger and thirst. The thought was so monstrous that it was hard to believe. This was not just negligence or an accident. It was a cold-blooded and cruel murder that lasted for days. The police realized that they were not looking for just any random criminal. They were looking for someone who knew the area well, someone who knew about the existence of this mine, knew about the vertical descent and the side exit. Perhaps he himself had set the trap on the surface that they had fallen into, and he knew how to cover his tracks and leave unnoticed. Perhaps through some other narrow crevice or ventilation shaft known only to him. The case went from being a cold one to the highest priority investigation. Now the police had a goal to find the monster who had turned the old mine into a tomb for 2 innocent people. And this monster was still out there somewhere. The police worked on the case for 2 years. The list of suspects was very short. Who could have known so much about these mines? Who could have had welding equipment and the skills to use it in such a remote area? The investigators began to do what they should have done back in 2011. They started digging up all the property and lease records for these abandoned lands. Most of the mines belonged to no one, but some plots, including the one where Sara and Andrew died, were on long-term lease to a private individual. He was a man in his 60s who lived alone on a small ranch a few dozen miles away. He had been leasing the land for many years, ostensibly for geological research, although he did not actually conduct any real activity there. Neighbors described him as unsociable and secretive, who did not like it when anyone appeared on his property. He had repeatedly come into conflict with tourists or hunters who accidentally wandered onto his land. For the police, this was the first real lead they had had in all this time. They obtained a search warrant for his home and property. The man himself, the owner of the rental property, greeted the police without surprise, but with poorly concealed hostility. He denied everything, saying that he knew nothing about any missing tourists and had not been in the area of that mine for many years. But during a search of his workshop, investigators found something that silenced him. Hanging on a nail among a pile of old tools was a bunch of keys. These were the keys to the old locks on the gates that blocked some of the entrances to the mines. And in a desk drawer, under a pile of old bills, lay a yellowed sheet of paper rolled into a tube. It was not just a map of the area. It was a detailed diagram of the internal passages of several mines, including that one. The diagram marked not only the main entrance and the vertical shaft, but also several narrow ventilation tunnels that even the Mine Supervision Service did not know about. One of these tunnels led to the surface almost a mile from the main entrance. This was the answer to the question of how the killer could have disappeared after sealing the exit from the inside. He had his own secret way out. When he was shown this diagram, the man realized that it was useless to deny it, and he spoke, but it was not remorse. He told his version of events dryly and emotionlessly. That day, he was patrolling his territory and heard screams. He followed the sound and found 2 people in the mine. They had fallen into an old pit that he himself had once covered with rotten boards to keep animals out. He saw that they were alive but injured. They were on his land, strangers, intruders. In his twisted mind, they were not victims, but a problem. He did not talk to them. He just walked away silently. He returned to his ranch, took a welding machine and a generator, loaded everything into his pickup truck, and drove to the side entrance of the mine. He did not consider himself to be killing them. In his logic, he was simply securing his property. He welded the exit shut so that outsiders would no longer climb where they shouldn't. He admitted that he blocked the entrance, but he denied murder to the end, insisting that they were to blame because they had trespassed on his property. He simply locked the door behind the intruders. The fact that 2 wounded people were dying in darkness and agony behind that door did not seem to bother him. The trial was not long. There was more than enough evidence. Prosecutors did not bring a direct charge of intentional murder. It was difficult to prove that he wanted them dead. The official version, as stated in the verdict, was as follows: intentional abandonment in danger, resulting in the death of 2 persons. For finding the wounded Sara and Andrew, and instead of helping them, condemning them to a painful death by sealing them in a stone bag. He received 18 years in prison. The mystery that had tormented everyone for almost 10 years was solved. Behind this terrible and inexplicable disappearance were neither the mystical forces of the desert nor serial killers from movies. There was only one person, a person whose paranoid hatred of strangers proved stronger than ordinary human compassion. The story of Sara and Andrew ended, not on the day they disappeared, and not even on the day their bodies were found. It ended the moment justice named the person who left them to die in the cold darkness of an abandoned mine.